So if you didn't know, I made a video about why I think people quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And I made that video in response to a podcast episode between Tolarian Community College and Paul from Team APS, which addressed some of the differences and problems between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic. And I ultimately made my video in response to why so many people quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And go over to Magic, since it was a topic of discussion in the podcast. And the reactions to my video were really interesting from what I've seen in the comments section, and many of you stated your reasons for why you quit Yu-Gi-Oh! So today I'm going to look at your reasons for quitting Yu-Gi-Oh! So without any further ado, let's get into it. Justice Judge said, "I survived Dragon Rulers plus Spellbook, but once Pendulum hit, I was done, so I can confirm Pendulum really did throw a lot of people off the game. Now I don't follow the meta or know much, but the gist is, if you are going second and you don't have a hand trap, you will instantly lose because the person going first just sets up a massive board and when your turn rolls around, just negates you and GG. So he touches upon a point that I mentioned before in my video about why people quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And he basically says pendulums are the reason why a lot of people turned away from the game, but it's interesting since that he also raised a point about hand traps. He basically says that he feels that you need to have a hand trap or a bunch of them when you go second, which points out the OP nature of going first. Especially since I've heard a lot of people say that going second does feel like a handicap and you have to contend with the dreaded unbreakable boards that happened. And there was a period of time when this was at a fever pitch, but it's definitely still around even today, even though there are ways to deal with multiple negates, and even though there are ways to deal with hand traps. However, not every deck is equipped to deal with threats like this, and God help you if you don't have any hand traps to deal with your opponent's plays. But what's worse is that 1 or 2 card combos kinda make hand traps pointless in a sense, since you have to bait out the hand trap and you can then pop off with a combo. So really I relate with this guy, and it kinda does drive home the whole spam game kind of strategy that he's talking about. The next person says, "Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't what it used to be anymore. Everyone just follows metas, and the charm of trying to find your own combos is just gone. And nowadays, there are just people pulling a lot of BS while I'm still using basic stuff. I want to quit, but I really can't, and plus the fact that they added a lot of weird and unnecessary summons. I can understand Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, and XYZ summoning, but WTF, Pendulum, and Link. That shit doesn't belong. I don't want my monster to be a spell, and I don't want to be picky of where to put my monster just because of Link summons." So I totally agree with the first part of what this guy says. Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't how it used to be, and creativity does feel a bit stifled since you have to follow the meta if you don't want to get blown out of the water. And you're very restricted in what you can do with your deck since you can't deviate too far from the accepted meta or your deck risks being less successful, which does detract from the creative deck building process. Some people argue that these slight variations is what makes each individual build creative. And while I do see their point, it is a very slim margin of creativity. However, this commentator touches upon another point that I made in my Why I Think People Quit Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. And it deals with the idea that players tend to quit with the addition of new extra deck mechanics. And he did mention that he very much dislikes links and pendulums, which are the mechanics that tend to cause a lot of players to quit. And at least that's from my experience. And I've made follow-up videos on this topic, and I'll put them up on the screen just so you can check them out. President Stone says, "I quit Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I wasn't a fan of XYZs. No way in hell can I get back into the game now. Personally, it's not fun with all the negates and the crazy combos you can do now. I like the slow Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds era." So this is interesting. This person says he quit Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of XYZs, which is not one of the mechanics I hear the most about when talking about people quitting, but I completely see where he's coming from. I think XYZ's only added to the spam game since it's easy to get out a rank 4 XYZ monster, and I went into more detail about that in my Extra Deck Evolutions video about XYZs, so feel free to check it out. But furthermore, he brings up the point that the OP negates and the crazy combos make the game less fun, and I have to agree. And I also have to agree with him that the speed during the 5Ds era was kind of the ideal speed. Michael Harris says, I'm at the point where I just play Duel Links, but when Pendulum happens, I'll probably quit that too. It's just not fun anymore. I'm not saying I have to win all the time, but it's basically a money game. You're only as good as how much money that you can spend, and that's not fun. And again, the Pendulum hate comes in strong. This person expresses how he quit because of pendulums, and interestingly enough, he kind of implies that it made him go to Duel Links, and that's something that I've heard quite a bit. I've heard quite a lot of people going to Duel Links since it kind of reminds them of basic Yu-Gi-Oh! But man, it looks like pendulums could ruin Duel Links for him if and when they finally hit that format. And he also points out that the money kind of sours the game for him, and I kind of agree, but you kind of have to use some sort of skill in order to get your strategy going. However, expensive cards do make combos more easy to fulfill. This person says, the group I played Yu-Gi-Oh! IRL with went from about 8 people to 3 when Links came out. Links genuinely killed the game for people. We had people join during Pendulum. Man, that's rough. Going 8 to 3, that's... wow, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. I remember that was the case for me when Pendulums came around, but yeah, Links are another mechanic that royally pissed off a lot of people, and I can personally relate to that since a lot of people I knew went out during that time. And it's interesting that you kind of said some people joined during Pendulums, and that's great to hear since it's always great to have new people enter the Yu-Gi-Oh! Scene. Solemn Vow says, Pendulums, enough said. This person says, I played Plant Synchro till XYZs and the ban list made it unplayable. I tried Evil Swarm for a while, but once Pendulum came out, I couldn't keep up with the rules and the new cards, so I went back to Magic. I play Duel Links occasionally, but it's about getting there as well. Oh, okay, so this is a bit of a different lead up to this particular case. It looks like the ban list may have played an effect on his reasons for quitting, and it's something that I did talk about in my initial video, but it ultimately looks like pendulums were kind of the nail in the coffin for him. And it looks like pendulum rules may have been obnoxious to him, which is completely understandable, and it's a topic that I go into more detail in my first video about why Konami should stop making extra deck mechanics. But here you have it, the first person to go over to Magic in this instance, and they stuck to playing Duel Links as well. So we have a first-hand example of pendulums turning Yu-Gi-Oh! Players over to Magic. This person says, I miss the old Yu-Gi-Oh! Back then when there were normal monster, basic spells, and traps, along with some effect monsters with 1 effect or 2 at most. Of course, boss monsters were cool as well, like fusion summons, but since everything today can result in a 1-turn FTK, along with all these convoluted mechanics, like Link and Pendulum summons, along with making traps useless and negating your opponent from doing anything that turn. What's the point of a card game if it's simply who starts first, who can win the game? Along with that, so many cards are overpriced, people are forced to buy the best decks, which get demolished by the next booster pack. So we kinda saw this before, and it's a fairly common reason why I hear people say they quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's basically looking back at the simpler days, and this guy kind of wants that simplicity again. He again refers to the issues created by the power creep, since he critiques the OP first turn win decks and things like pendulums and links, which made the game more confusing for him, I guess. But he also refers to traps being cast off to the side, which is another interesting point that I agree with him. And I do think that they're largely irrelevant now, and I've made a whole video on the fall of trap cards. But other than that, he pretty much brings up other similar topics that were mentioned before, like overbearing negations, issue with going first, high prices, and having to use the latest cards. Furthermore, this user says pendulums hands down ruined everything. Eric Christensen says, my thoughts on modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's easy to see why a lot of people started quitting the game from then on. Came back for links only to quit again since they broke the game further. The game is just rock, paper, scissors now. Whoever goes first is the winner due to how broken the summoning are now, since special summons are unlimited. You could do some pretty strong special summon combos back in the old days as in prior to Synchro, but nothing compared to now where you can special summon more than half your deck into your field, hand, and graveyard, have all of your most busted cards out, and 5+ hand negate monster cards all in your first turn to basically lock out your opponent from doing anything, and the match is over with. That's not a fun card game. There is no more strategy involved in it anymore, nor even RNG, since the special summon deck cycle chain just removes the aspect entirely. Absolutely, I definitely agree with him that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can feel like a game of rock, paper, scissors since you have an overwhelming advantage going first, and you're basically fighting an uphill battle, and going first can literally be determined by playing rock, paper, scissors. And this is made worse because of how fast the power creep has progressed to the point where you can burn through half of your deck, much like how this guy described. And the special summon frenzy definitely doesn't help. So I'm gonna skip portions of this next comment just so I can hone in onto the main core of his critique. Anyways, Eclipse says, I quit about a decade and a half because I just hit burnout. I was tired of collecting, I was tired of decks becoming more and more obsolete as the seasons, not years, went on. 5 years later, maybe a little more, I hear about synchro summons, XYZ summons, pendulum summons, all these new rules that I'd have to learn on top of my old decks being mocked and laughed at, which I spent a lot of time, money, and effort to making by a-hole players in the community. Yeah, I can't say I'm sorry for not looking back. The artwork of these cards and the nostalgia is all I have now. And I don't have any friends who know how to play, and they'd probably be turned off from the absurd mountain of new rules in what used to be a simple game. And it's only gonna get more and more complicated as the years go by. So we have our first instance of someone quitting because of burnout. And it kind of makes sense because of how interwoven the rules are. And he kind of goes on to say that he's heard about how much more complicated the game has become, and new extra deck mechanics like pendulums and links further added barriers to when he tried to re-enter the game. So it's basically tougher on him, part with having to relearn his old outdated decks, which he spent a lot of time, money, and effort to make. So I can completely sympathize with this situation, since I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too friendly to people trying to get into the game. And these are also things that I cover in my videos about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Player growth problem. But yeah, it really sucks investing a lot of time and money into a deck only to have it quickly become irrelevant. He also mentioned that he quit because of the anime, and because of how 5Ds had the whole premise of riding motorcycles and playing card games. And he thought the premise was really dumb, which I can't really blame him because that was the sentiment that was really going around at first. And I actually knew a few people who quit because of it. But ironically, it became my favorite show and my favorite period in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game in general. This user says, man, everybody is saying they quit and felt this way with pendulums. With me, it was synchro. They didn't need different special summoning mechanics, but the game has always been messy. Vampires classified as zombies, and having an aqua type and water attribute were always redundant. Stuff like that. I still go back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Every couple of years, never tried anything beyond fusion and ritual though. Okay, so this person takes issue with synchros. I definitely saw some resistance to synchros when they first came out, and people were trying to stick with fusions, but overall I did see more pendulum hate, but this definitely began like the kind of resistance against the extra deck mechanics in general. You might as well play solitaire. I straight up stopped playing cause it got too damn ridiculously expensive. Aside from the addition of the mechanics of pendulums and links, now I just collect singles and structure decks for the nostalgia factor. The old style Yu-Gi-Oh was the best. You didn't have pendulum cards, no XYZ cards, no link cards, no cards with stupidly long confusing cards. It was plain and simple. 100% agree. I used to be a pretty big Yu-Gi-Oh guy that went to tournaments and stuff earlier on, but slowly moved to just online play and then fully quit after Link or Synchro was introduced. Don't remember which I viewed was worse. So adding those new mechanics made the game shit in my opinion. Modern duels are like barfing out 10 cards per turn or something ridiculous. I bet the average turn length has increased like 10 times with all these new mechanics. Even as a former vet, it's hard for me to keep track of all the shit people are doing with these new decks whenever I see one for the curiosity's sake. Synchros and tuners made me quit. So yeah, those were some of the reasons why you quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And I wanted to read through your comments since I really do want to get to the bottom as to why so many people quit Yu-Gi-Oh! Or they quit Yu-Gi-Oh! And go over to Magic. And your comments really helped open my eyes to some of the other reasons as to why you quit. And although some of the comments were based on a lot of the reasons I gave in my initial video, it was still interesting getting an alternate perspective. But with that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you would like to support more content like this in the future, you can do so at my Necromancer 1040 Patreon link down below. I normally post it in the description, and you can check it there along with the other cool things I normally post down below. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alright, take care.